The DNA test was supposed to connect me to distant cousins, maybe find some Irish heritage. Instead, it led me to a compound in Montana, where my father was living under a different name. He's married to 3 women and calling himself a prophet. My name is Sarah, and this is how a simple spit test shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Growing up, I had what I thought was the most boring family story ever. My dad, Michael Chen, was an accountant who left when I was 3. My mom, Linda, always told the same story. They met in college, he was studying business, she was in nursing school. Classic American love story, right? They got married young, had me, and then one day he just ... disappeared. Packed his bags while Mom was at work and left a note saying he needed to find himself. Mom raised me alone in suburban Phoenix, and honestly, she did an amazing job. She never bad-mouthed my dad, even though I could see the hurt in her eyes whenever I asked about him. Your father was a good man, she'd say. He just got lost somewhere along the way. She'd show me the only photo she kept of him. A graduation picture from Arizona State where he's smiling this awkward, genuine smile, wearing a cheap suit that was probably borrowed. As a kid, I used to stare at that photo for hours, trying to find myself in his features. We had the same dark hair, same stubborn chin, but that was about all I had of him. No birthday cards, no phone calls, no child support. It was like he vanished into thin air. By the time I turned 32, I'd built a pretty good life, despite the abandonment issues that definitely required therapy. I'm a graphic designer, married to an amazing guy named Jake, who never makes me feel broken because of my daddy issues. We have 2 kids, Emma, who's 8, and little David, who's 5. But there was always this nagging curiosity about my dad's side of the family. My mom's side was huge and loud. Italian Americans who gathered every Sunday for dinner and argued about everything from sports to politics. But my dad's side, complete mystery. Mom said he never talked much about his family, claimed they weren't close. She thought he might have had a sister somewhere, maybe some cousins, but he was always vague about it. The thing that really got to me was medical history. Every time I took the kids to the doctor and they asked about family medical history, I had to leave half the form blank. What if there was something genetic I should know about? Heart disease, diabetes, cancer risk. My mom had given me everything she could, but she only knew my dad for 3 years, and half of that time they were college kids who thought they were invincible. So last Christmas, Jake bought me one of those DNA testing kits. You know the ones? Discover Your Heritage. Pictures of happy families connecting across continents. I laughed when I opened it, but secretly I was thrilled. Finally, maybe I'd get some answers. The process was anticlimactic. Spit in a tube, mail it off, wait 6 weeks. I honestly forgot about it until the email showed up in February. Your DNA results are ready. I was making lunch for the kids when the notification pinged, and my heart did this little flip. This was it. It's time to solve the mystery of the missing Michael Chen. I expected to find some distant cousins, maybe trace our family back to China or Taiwan. What I definitely didn't expect was what actually showed up on my screen that Tuesday afternoon, while my kids were napping and Jake was at work. The DNA match list loaded, and right there at the top, bold and impossible to miss. Close family match. Probability. Father-daughter, 99.9%. But the name wasn't Michael Chen. It was David Mountain Thunder. I stared at the screen, refreshing it 3 times, certain there was some mistake. David Mountain Thunder? What kind of name was that? And why did it say he was living in Montana? My dad was Michael Chen from Phoenix, Arizona. This had to be wrong. But then I looked closer at the profile. Age 58, that would be right. And there was a photo, just a partial profile shot, but something about the jawline, the way he held his shoulders. My hand started shaking as I grabbed that old graduation photo of my dad from the kitchen drawer. The bone structure was the same, the ears. God, those were definitely the same slightly prominent ears I'd inherited and always hated. But this man had long gray hair and a braid, deeply tanned skin, and was wearing what looked like handmade clothes. If this was my father, he'd transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. I spent the next hour clicking through everything I could access about David Mountain Thunder. His profile was sparse. No family tree filled out, no other photos, just that one haunting image and a location. Kalispell, Montana. But there were other matches connected to him, people with names like River Moonbeam and Star Rising Eagle. What the hell had my dad gotten himself into? The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was a mistake. DNA tests weren't perfect, right? There had to be some explanation that didn't involve my boring accountant father transforming into ... whatever this was. But deep down, in that place where you know things before your brain catches up, I already understood that my entire family story was about to be rewritten. That night, after Jake got home and the kids were in bed, I showed him the results. His reaction was exactly what mine should have been. Babe, this has to be a mistake. Your dad was Michael Chen. This guy probably just has similar DNA by coincidence. But I couldn't let it go. I kept staring at that profile photo, seeing my own features reflected back at me in this stranger's face, and that name. David Mountain Thunder. It felt almost like a joke, except nobody was laughing. The next few weeks were torture. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep, couldn't have a normal conversation with Jake without bringing up the DNA thing, as he started calling it. I'd find myself Googling David Mountain Thunder at 2 a.m, finding absolutely nothing except a few mentions in obscure forums about something called the Sacred Earth Fellowship in Montana. My mom noticed I was acting weird during our weekly phone calls. "Sarah, honey, you sound distracted. Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell her, but how do you explain that the man who abandoned you both might be living under a fake name in Montana? Plus, I still wasn't even sure it was really him. The breaking point came 3 weeks after I got the results. Emma was working on a family tree project for school, and she asked me to help her fill in my dad's side. I stared at that blank branch on her poster board and realized I could unkeep living with this question mark hanging over our family. I decided to reach out through the DNA website's messaging system. I spent hours crafting the message, trying to sound casual but not crazy. "Hi, the DNA website shows we might be related. I'm looking for information about my biological father, Michael Chen, who lived in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1990s. If this sounds familiar, I'd love to connect." I hit send before I could chicken out, then immediately regretted it. What if this guy was dangerous? What if he was some kind of con artist using fake names? What if he contacted my mom? What? The anxiety ate at me for days. Then exactly 1 week later, I got a response that made my blood run cold. "Sarah, I have been waiting for this message for 29 years. Yes, I am the man you once knew as Michael Chen. I go by David now. There is much to explain. Are you ready to hear the truth about why I left?" I literally threw my phone across the room. Jake found me sitting on the kitchen floor, hyperventilating, clutching that old graduation photo. He responded. I managed to gasp out, "It's really him." The message continued when I finally worked up the courage to read the rest. "I left because I was called to a higher purpose. The man you knew as your father was living a lie, trapped in the material world. I found my true path and my spiritual family here in Montana. I understand you may have anger, but I hope you can understand that I did what I had to do to become who I was meant to be. Higher purpose, spiritual family." This sounded like cult talk, and I'd watched enough documentaries to recognize the red flags. But this was my father, the man whose absence had shaped my entire life. And he was talking about finding his true path like leaving his 3-year-old daughter with some kind of spiritual awakening. I showed Jake the message that night. His face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on protective anger. "Sarah, this guy sounds completely unstable. 29 years, and he's talking about higher purposes. He abandoned you and your mom, and now he's trying to make it sound noble." But I couldn't let it go. I wrote back, "What kind of higher purpose involves abandoning your child? And what do you mean by spiritual family? I need to understand what happened to my father." His response came 2 days later. "The Sacred Earth Fellowship showed me that traditional family structures are illusions that keep us trapped in ego-driven cycles. My daughter, you were loved, but I had to transcend earthly attachments to serve the greater good. I am part of something bigger now. We live simply, commune with nature, and prepare for the coming transformation of humanity. I have 3 wives here and 7 children who all call me Father David. You have half-siblings who would welcome you." 3 wives, 7 children, Father David. I felt sick. My boring accountant dad hadn't just left. He dejoined some polygamist cult and replaced our entire family with a new one. And somehow, in his twisted logic, this was supposed to be spiritual growth. The worst part was how he talked about me being loved in past tense, like I was just a phase he'd grown out of. Meanwhile, he had 7 other kids who got to grow up with a father, even if that father was clearly delusional. I started researching the Sacred Earth Fellowship obsessively. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. It was founded in 1995 by a man named Prophet Samuel, who preached about the coming collapse of society and the need for chosen families to survive in isolated communities. There were reports of financial exploitation, arranged marriages, and children being kept out of school. The compound in Montana was basically off the grid. No internet, no outside contact, completely controlled environment. And my father wasn't just a member. From what I could piece together from online forums and news articles, David Mountain Thunder was one of Prophet Samuel's inner circle, a trusted advisor who helped recruit new members and manage the compound's finances. My abandoned father had become a cult leader. The final piece of the puzzle came when I found a 2018 news article about a custody battle involving the Sacred Earth Fellowship. A woman named Jennifer Martinez had escaped the compound with her 2 children and was fighting to keep her ex-husband from taking them back. In the article, she mentioned that her ex-husband had been completely brainwashed by David Mountain Thunder, one of the Prophet's most devoted followers who helps convince new families to join. My father wasn't just in a cult. He was actively recruiting other families, possibly breaking up marriages and separating other children from their parents. The man I'd spent 30 years wondering about, missing, and trying to understand had become everything I could never respect, but I still needed to know more. I needed to understand how Michael Chen, college graduate and future accountant, had become David Mountain Thunder, cult recruiter and polygamist. And despite every rational thought in my head screaming at me to walk away, I knew I had to dig deeper into this nightmare. The decision to keep digging wasn't really a decision at all. It was more like being pulled into quicksand. Every rational part of me knew I should block his messages, delete the DNA results, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Jake practically begged me to let it go. Sarah, this isn't your dad anymore. Whatever happened to him, the man who left you is gone. This David guy is dangerous. But I couldn't explain the compulsion I felt. For 29 years, I'd had this father-shaped hole in my life. I'd gone to therapy, worked through my abandonment issues, built a healthy family of my own. I thought I'd made peace with not knowing. But now that I'd found him, walking away felt impossible. It was like finding out your house was built on top of a sinkhole. You QA'd just pretend you do want no. The messages kept coming. He'd write these long, rambling letters about spiritual awakening and transcending earthly bonds. But mixed in with the cult rhetoric were details that only my father would know. He remembered the stuffed elephant I carried everywhere as a toddler, Mr. Peanuts. He remembered that I used to sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider song wrong, saying itty bitty instead. He knew that my mom made these amazing blueberry pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse heads on Saturday mornings. Those details were what kept me hooked. This wasn't some stranger pretending to be my father. This was really him, just ... transformed into someone unrecognizable. And that somehow made it worse. If he'd died, I could have grieved and moved on. But knowing he was alive, that he'd chosen to leave and then built a whole new life while erasing me from it, that burned in a way I wasn't prepared for. The breakthrough came when I got desperate enough to hire a private investigator. I know it sounds extreme, but I needed to know what I was really dealing with. Was this actually a dangerous cult? Was he safe? Were there legal issues I should know about? The PI, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Walsh, called me back within a week with information that made my stomach drop. The Sacred Earth Fellowship wasn't just some harmless commune of hippies playing dress-up. They were under investigation by the FBI for tax evasion, child labor violations, and suspected human trafficking. 3 families had escaped in the past 5 years, all telling similar stories of financial exploitation, forced labor, and children being denied education and medical care. Your father, Patricia said, and hearing someone else call him that felt surreal, is listed as the compound's financial shepherd. He handles all the money. Members turn over their assets when they join, and he manages the group's finances. Sarah, I need to be direct with you. If this group is doing what these families claim, your father isn't just a victim of cult brainwashing. He's complicit in some serious crimes. Financial shepherd. My dad, who used to help my mom balance our checkbook at the kitchen table, was now managing a cult's money. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. But Patricia wasn't done. There's something else. I found records suggesting that Michael Chen didn't just disappear, he faked his death. There's a death certificate filed in Nevada in 1996, claiming he died in a hiking accident. The body was never found, but it was enough to close out his bank accounts and social security number. Sarah, your father didn't just abandon you. He legally erased himself to avoid any financial obligations. The room started spinning. He'd faked his death. All those years when Mom struggled to pay bills, when she worked double shifts at the hospital to keep our little house, when she could unafford to take vacations or buy me the nice clothes my friends had, he'd been alive the whole time, legally dead to avoid paying child support. I hung up with Patricia and immediately called my mom. I couldn't keep this secret anymore. Mom, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. Yeah, okay. I explained everything. The DNA test, the messages, the cult, the fake death, listened in complete silence until I finished. Sarah, she said finally, and her voice was shaking, I want you to stop talking to him right now. Whatever he's become, he's not the man I married, and he's not your father. A father doesn't abandon his child and then fake his death to avoid responsibility. But even as she said it, I could hear something else in her voice. Relief, maybe? Like she'd finally gotten an explanation for all those years of wondering what she'd done wrong. Why he'd left, whether he was dead or alive somewhere. I'm going to keep talking to him, I told her. I need to understand how this happened. How does someone go from being an accounting student to being a cult leader, Mom? ... I need to know about my half-siblings. There are 7 kids there who are my blood relatives. Sarah Elizabeth, she used my full name, which meant she was serious. Those children are not your responsibility. And this man is not someone you can save or fix or understand. Some people are just broken, honey. Sometimes they break themselves. That night, Jake found me in our bedroom, staring at my laptop screen with tears streaming down my face. I'd been looking at photos of the Sacred Earth Fellowship compound that Patricia had found, aerial shots showing a collection of ramshackle buildings surrounded by farmland, completely isolated from civilization. I keep thinking about those kids, I told him. My half-siblings. What kind of life are they living out there? And Jake, ... what if I can help them somehow? What if there's a reason I found him now? Jake sat down next to me and pulled me close. Baby, you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You definitely could, and fix 30 years of damage by talking to a cult leader through Facebook messages, but I was already past rational thinking. Tomorrow, I was going to call my father and tell him I wanted to know everything. How he'd ended up in Montana, how he'd become David Mountain Thunder, what happened to make him leave his old life behind. I needed the whole story, no matter how ugly it got. The phone call happened on a Tuesday morning in March. While Jake was at work and the kids were at school, I'd been putting it off for weeks. But Patricia had given me a window of opportunity. She discovered that members of the Sacred Earth Fellowship were allowed to make outside phone calls once a month. Always supervised, but there was usually a 15-minute window where they could speak privately. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times. But when the phone actually rang and I heard his voice for the first time in 29 years, everything I'd planned flew right out of my head. Sarah. Just my name, but the way he said it, with this deep, unfamiliar cadence that sounded like he was performing in a play, made my skin crawl. This wasn't how my father used to talk. This was someone else wearing his voice. Hi, ... Or, do you want me to call you David? I hated how uncertain I sounded, like I was asking permission to exist. David is my true name now, he said. Michael Chen was the illusion I lived in the material world. But for you, my daughter, I will always be your father. The words were right, but something about the tone was wrong. It was too practiced, too smooth, like he'd given this speech before. Realized he probably had. 2 other family members of other recruits, he'd helped lure to the compound. I need you to explain something to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Patricia Walsh told me you faked your death. Is that true? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then the woman who investigated me told you this? My blood went cold. He knew about Patricia. What do you know about her? Sarah, we are very careful about our security here. When someone starts asking questions about our community, we become aware of it. Your detective friend made quite a few phone calls to people who know us. The casual way he said it, like having a pie investigated was just normal business, terrified me. This wasn't some harmless hippie commune. These people had resources, connections, ways of monitoring anyone who got too close. Answer my question, I said, finding some backbone. Did you fake your death to avoid paying child support? Another long pause. The man who would have paid child support was trapped in a system. It's designed to keep him enslaved to material concerns. I freed myself from those bonds to serve a higher purpose. It's not an answer. That's cult bullshit. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about his feelings. His voice changed then, became sharper, more like the father I remembered from my earliest memories. You don't understand what you're talking about, Sarah. I was dying in that life. Working 60 hours a week for someone else's dreams, paying taxes to a corrupt government, raising a child in a world that was headed for collapse. The fellowship showed me a different way. You were raising a child, I shot back. You were raising me, then you abandoned me to go play house with some other kids, while my mom worked herself to death trying to support us both. Your mother was strong. I knew she could handle it. And look, you turned out fine, didn't you? You have a family, a career. You didn't need me holding you back. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. He'd convinced himself that abandoning me was actually a favor, that I was better off without him. Maybe I was, but that wasn't his choice to make. I needed my father, I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts to stay strong. I spent my entire childhood wondering why I wasn't worth staying for. I went to therapy for years trying to understand what was wrong with me that made you leave. Nothing was wrong with you, daughter. Everything was wrong with the world I was living in, but I can make it right now. You could come here, meet your brothers and sisters. You could see what real family looks like. The word daughter coming from his mouth felt like poison. Real family? You mean your cult wives and the children you had to replace me? The Sacred Earth Fellowship isn't a cult, Sarah. We're a community of people who've chosen to live according to spiritual principles instead of material greed. My wives are my partners in building something beautiful. Your half-siblings are being raised with values, connected to the earth, free from the corruption of modern society, and completely isolated from the outside world. With no education, no medical care, and no choice about their own futures. You've been listening to lies from people who want to destroy what we've built here. The children are healthy and happy. They're learning skills that will serve them when society collapses. They are not being poisoned by television and video games and government schools that teach them to be consumers, instead of human beings. I realized then that there was no reasoning with him. 30 years in this place had completely rewired his brain. The father who used to read me bedtime stories and help me with my math homework was gone, replaced by this stranger who spoke in rehearsed talking points about spiritual awakening and social collapse. I want to understand something, I said. When you left, when you faked your death, did you ever think about what it would do to me? Did you ever wonder if I was okay, if I needed you, if I missed you? The pause this time was different. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more human. I thought about you every day for the first 5 years. But then Prophet Samuel taught me that dwelling on past attachments was keeping me from my true purpose. I had to let you go to become who I needed to be. So you just ... stopped thinking about me? I transferred my paternal energy to the children here who needed it. You had your mother. These children only had us. That was when I knew with absolute certainty that the man on the phone wasn't my father anymore. My father would never have spoken about transferring paternal energy. Like love was some kind of finite resource that could be moved from one account to another. The conversation ended when someone in the background told him his phone time was up. Just like that. Click, dial tone, and I was sitting in my kitchen listening to nothing, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I don't remember the next few hours very clearly. I know I called Patricia and told her everything. No, I called my mom and cried until my throat was raw. No, I was still sitting at the kitchen table in my pajamas, when Jake got home from work and found me staring at my phone, like it might ring again. He's gone, I told Jake. Not dead gone, but the person he became isn't my father anymore. He's this stranger who talks about transferring paternal energy and thinks abandoning me was actually a spiritual favor. Jake held me while I cried, but I could feel his relief. He'd been terrified that I was going to want to visit the compound or try to maintain some kind of relationship with this man. Instead, The phone call had done exactly what he'd hoped, shown me that there was nothing left to salvage. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, I got a message through the DNA website that made my blood run cold. "Sarah, this is Rebecca. I'm your half-sister.
Oh.
I found your profile through Father David's matches. I'm 16 and I need help.
Help.
Can you call me at this number? Please don't tell anyone. I'm using a friend's phone." My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. A teenage girl answered on the first ring, whispering urgently, "Is this Sarah, Father David's daughter from before?" "Yes, it's me." "Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm at a McDonald's in Kalispell. I ran away from the compound yesterday. I heard Father David talking to Mother Susan about the phone call with you, and I knew I had to contact you. Sarah, we need help. All of us kids. This place, it's not what he tells people it is." My heart was pounding. "Rebecca, are you safe right now? Do you have somewhere to go?" "I'm staying with a friend from school. Well, I used to go to school before they pulled us all out last year. But I can't stay here long. Her parents don't know the whole story. Sarah, I know this is crazy, but ... could you help me? I don't know anyone else in the outside world." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and research. I called Patricia, who immediately drove to Montana to meet Rebecca. I called a lawyer who specialized in cult extraction cases. I called my mom, who without hesitation said, "Bring her here. Child needs family." Rebecca's story was worse than anything I'd imagined. The Sacred Earth Fellowship wasn't just controlling, it was abusive. Children were assigned to marriages as young as 14, so they worked 16-hour days, farming and maintaining the compound with no pay. Education stopped at 8th grade because higher learning corrupts the spirit. Medical care was provided by a former veterinarian who'd had his medical license revoked. And my father, David Mountain Thunder, was right in the middle of it all. He arranged the marriages, managed the money that kept everyone trapped, and used his accounting skills to hide assets and avoid taxes. Rebecca told me that the other kids were terrified of him because he decided who got punished and how. "He talks about you sometimes," Rebecca whispered during one of our phone calls. "He says you were lost to the material world, but that maybe someday you'll see the truth and come home. Sarah, he's planning to contact you again. He wants you to visit." The thought of stepping foot on that compound made me physically sick, but I also knew that Rebecca couldn't be the only one who wanted out. "How many of you are there? How many kids want to leave?" 6 of us are old enough to understand what's happening. The little ones, ... they don't know any different. But the older kids, we talk about it when we're working in the fields. You know this isn't normal. See families in town when we go to sell vegetables. And they don't live like us. That's when I made the decision that probably saved lives, but definitely ended any possibility of a relationship with my father. I called the FBI. Agent Martinez, no relation to the Jennifer Martinez who'd escaped years earlier, listened to everything I had to tell her about the compound, about Rebecca's escape, about the financial crimes and child abuse. She told me they'd been building a case against the Sacred Earth Fellowship for years, but they needed someone on the inside willing to testify. "Your sister's testimony could be the key to shutting this place down," she said. "But I need you to know, once we move on this, there's no going back. Your father will know you were involved." I thought about my conversation with him, about how casually he'd mentioned that they knew Patricia was investigating them. I thought about Rebecca and the other kids trapped in that compound. I thought about my own children, safe in their beds, getting to go to school and make their own choices about their futures. "Do it," I told Agent Martinez. "Whatever it takes to get those kids out safely." The raid happened 2 weeks later. I watched the news coverage from my living room, seeing aerial shots of the compound I'd stared at in photos. Watching FBI agents escort children, my half-siblings, away from the only home they'd ever known. My father was arrested, along with Prophet Samuel and 3 other leaders. The charges included tax evasion, child labor violations, and facilitating the sexual abuse of minors. When they showed his mugshot on the news, I barely recognized him. The long hair was gone, the tan had faded, and he looked like exactly what he was, a 58-year-old man who'd spent 30 years living a lie. The last message I got from him came through his lawyer a month later. "Tell Sarah I forgive her for not understanding. Tell her the door is always open when she's ready to see the truth. Even in jail facing federal charges, he still thought he was the enlightened one, and I was the one who needed saving. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was never going to see my father again. Michael Chen had died the day he became David Mountain Thunder, and I was finally ready to let him go. The trial lasted 8 months. I testified twice. Once about my father's financial history before he disappeared, and once about his attempts to recruit me to visit the compound. Each time I had to say my father in reference to the man sitting at the defendant's table, it felt like swallowing glass. He was convicted on 12 federal charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison. At 58, with his earliest possible parole at age 75, it was essentially a life sentence. Prophet Samuel got life without parole. The other leaders got sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. But the real victory wasn't the convictions, it was the kids. All 14 children from the compound were placed in foster care, or with relatives who'd escaped years earlier. Rebecca came to live with us for 6 months, while the courts worked out permanent placement with her maternal grandmother in Oregon. Having her in our house was surreal. She looked so much like me at that age, but she'd lived experiences I couldn't even imagine. "Do you hate him?" she asked me one night while we were doing dishes. She'd been with us for 3 months by then, long enough to start acting like a normal teenager instead of a traumatized cult survivor. "I hate what he became," I told her, "but I think the man who was actually my father died a long time ago. What's left is just ... someone wearing his face." Rebecca nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "I used to have dreams about the father he was before, when he still remembered loving you. Mother Susan told a story sometimes about how he used to cry when he looked at your picture. But then Prophet Samuel would punish him for dwelling on past attachments, and he'd put the picture away for longer each time." The idea that some part of him had grieved for me, at least in those early years, was both comforting and devastating. It meant the father who'd abandoned me had been in pain too. But it also meant he'd chosen to let that part of himself die rather than fight to come back to me. The hardest part of the whole experience was explaining it to Emma and David. How do you tell your 8-year-old that her grandfather, who she'd never met, was actually a cult leader who was now in prison? We ended up going to family therapy for a few months, all of us together, learning how to process this bizarre tragedy that had exploded into our normal suburban life. Emma, being 8, asked the questions that adults were too polite to voice. If Grandpa Michael was bad, does that mean Mommy might be bad too? Are there other secret family members we don't know about? Is our dad going to disappear and become someone else? David, at 5, mostly just wanted to know if the compound kids, his term for his half-aunts and uncles, were okay now. In his simple 5-year-old logic, if they were safe and had families to take care of them, then the story had a happy ending. I started going to therapy individually too, working through 30 years of abandonment issues that had taken on a whole new dimension. It's one thing to be abandoned by a father who might be dead or might be struggling with his own demons. It's another thing entirely to discover that your father chose to erase you from existence, so completely that he literally faked his death to avoid any legal obligation to your welfare. The hardest thing to accept, my therapist Dr. Rodriguez told me, is that some people are capable of compartmentalizing love in ways that seem impossible to those of us with healthy emotional development. Your father probably did love you in his limited way, but he loved his new identity more. A year after the trial, I got a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won out. It was 4 pages of rambling about how prison was just another test of his spiritual commitment, how the other inmates looked up to him as a teacher, how he was using his time to write a book about authentic living in an inauthentic world. There was exactly 1 paragraph about me. I hope you understand now that everything I did was necessary for my spiritual evolution. You were never meant to be my only daughter. You were meant to be my first daughter, the one who opened my heart to the possibility of loving all children equally. I am proud of the woman you became without me holding you back with small dreams and limited vision. I read that paragraph 5 times, looking for any hint of remorse, any acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, any recognition that I was a real person whose life had been shaped by his choices. There was nothing. Even in prison, facing the destruction of his life's work, he still believed that abandoning me had been a gift. That's when something inside me finally clicked into place. I wasn't going to get the apology I'd spent 30 years wanting. I wasn't going to get acknowledgement or explanation or any kind of emotional resolution from him. The closure I needed had to come from me. I threw the letter away and wrote my own letter, not to him, but to the father I'd needed as a child. I wrote about all the school plays he missed, all the nights I'd waited by the window hoping he'd come back, all the times I'd wondered if I was lovable enough to make someone stay. Then I wrote about the life I'd built without him, the career, the marriage, the children who would never doubt that their parents loved them enough to stay. It took me 2 years to feel ready, but eventually I visited Rebecca in Oregon. She was thriving with her grandmother, catching up on her education, making friends, learning to navigate the world outside the compound. She'd grown 3 inches and started wearing normal teenage clothes instead of the handmade dresses from the fellowship. "Do you think about him much?" I asked her, as we sat on her grandmother's porch watching her little cousins play in the yard. "I think about who he could have been if he hadn't gotten lost," she said. "Like I can see glimpses sometimes of the person he was before Prophet Samuel got to him. But the man who raised us in that compound, I'm glad he's gone." That visit was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Rebecca and I looked alike, but we'd had completely different fathers. Mine had abandoned me, but left me free to build a normal life. Hers had stayed but trapped her in a nightmare. Neither of us got the father we deserved, but we'd both survived and found ways to thrive. I still get updates about the other kids sometimes through social workers or news articles about cult recovery. Most of them are doing well, getting educations, forming healthy relationships, learning to make their own choices about their futures. Few struggle with the transition to normal society. They're getting help and support that was never available to them before. My father writes me letters occasionally. I stopped reading them after the first one, but I keep them in a box in my closet. Maybe someday Emma or David will want to understand this part of their family history, or maybe they'll be able to see something in those letters that I can't. Or maybe they'll throw them away without reading them, and that will be their choice to make. The DNA test that started this whole journey sits in a drawer in my kitchen now, next to the old graduation photo of Michael Chen. Sometimes I look at them together and try to understand how the smiling young man in the cheap suit became the cult leader in the prison jumpsuit. I don't think I'll ever really understand it, but I've made peace with not understanding. What I do understand now is that some people are capable of disappearing so completely from their old lives that they become different people entirely. The father who abandoned me wasn't just physically absent, he was existentially absent. Having chosen to eliminate that version of himself in favor of something he thought was better. My kids ask about him sometimes, usually when they're working on family tree projects or filling out medical forms. I tell them the truth in age-appropriate ways, Grandpa. Michael got very confused about what was important in life and made some bad choices that hurt a lot of people. He's in prison now, and while I hope he finds peace somehow, he's not part of our family anymore. Emma, who's 10 now, asked me recently if I wished none of it had ever happened. The DNA test, the discovery, all of it. It's a fair question. Would I have been happier never knowing what became of him? The honest answer is that I'm glad I know. Not because it gave me any kind of relationship with him, but because it finally put to rest 30 years of wondering and hoping and imagining scenarios where he might come back. The man I'd been missing was already gone long before I started looking for him. And finding him led to saving Rebecca and the other kids, which feels like the only truly good thing to come out of this whole nightmare. Maybe that was the point, not to reunite with my father, but to help end the cycle of abandonment and abuse he'd become part of. These days, when people ask me about family, I talk about Jake and the kids, about my mom who raised me with enough love for 2 parents, about Rebecca who feels more like a real sister than a half-sister I barely knew existed. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to stay, who show up when things get hard, who love you enough to tell you difficult truths. I look at Emma and David now and I see the family I was meant to have. Not perfect, but present. Not dramatic, but dependable. They'll never wonder if they're lovable enough to make someone stay, because Jake and I made the choice my father couldn't. We chose them. Every day, over every other possibility. My name is Sarah, and I took a DNA test that led me to a cult compound in Montana. I found my father, but more importantly, I found my way to letting him go. The man who raised me was my mother, and the family that matters is the one sleeping safely upstairs right now, dreaming dreams that will never include wondering if their parents love them enough to stay. Some stories don't end with reconciliation or forgiveness or happy reunions. Sometimes they end with the simple, radical act of choosing to build something better with the people who deserve your love. And maybe that's enough.